The fluorescent lights of the DMV flickered overhead, casting a harsh glare on the line of waiting customers. She stood near the counter, her late husband's oversized Navy SEAL jacket draped over her shoulders, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. The staff's eyes narrowed at her appearance. A security guard pointed to the door. "You need to leave. This line is for official business only." She clutched the jacket tighter, her voice nearly lost in the hum of the room. "This is official." No one stepped forward to help. But somewhere nearby, a man watched in silence. His gaze lingered on the faded patch on her shoulder. When the tension in the room peaked, he shifted, revealing a glimpse of a trident tattoo on his forearm. The air seemed to change, and for a moment, everyone waited to see what would happen next. Martha adjusted the oversized olive-green jacket on her shoulders, the fabric pooling at her wrists. The SEAL team patch, faded and threadbare, stood out just enough for those who cared to notice. It was James's jackether late husband Sand. It hung on her frame like the memory of an embrace, both grounding and exposing her in the indifferent light of the DMV. She sat quietly, hands trembling as she touched the silver chain around her neck, the weight of his wedding ring hidden beneath the collar. That small circle of metal was a private comfort, a secret tether to a life that had ended but refused to fade. She kept her paperwork close, a battered folder filled with the same documents she'd presented on every visit. Her marriage certificate, the official VA forms, proof of her connection to James. Each time, the answer was the same: her documents were in order, but her appearance was not. The jacket, too large and too military, drew suspicion from the staff. Martha had been told more than once that her attire didn't meet the DMV's standards, as if the jacket itself was a challenge to their rules. Still, she wore it each time, needing that piece of him to face the endless requests for proof. Around her, the waiting room pulsed with impatience. People glanced at the jacket, then quickly away, as if her grief might be contagious. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing out the color in the room. A trio of men in jeans and plain t-shirts lingered near the exit, their eyes steady on the scene unfolding. They spoke quietly among themselves, but their attention never left Martha. Their presence was subtle, but there was a weight to it, something unspoken that set them apart from the rest of the crowd. Martha's fingers closed around the edge of her folder, her thumb tracing the outline of the worn SEAL insignia on the jacket's shoulder. She tried to steady her breathing, repeating the same silent mantra that had gotten her through every appointment since James's funeral. Just get through this one. The jacket smelled faintly of aftershave and old fabric softener, a reminder of evenings spent waiting for him to come home. It made the sterile bureaucracy of the DMV feel less cold, less final. A child darted past her knees, nearly tripping over her boots. The mother offered a quick apology but hesitated, eyes lingering on the jacket before guiding her child away. Martha shifted in her seat, feeling the familiar weight of James's old challenge coin in the pocket. She resisted the urge to check her documents again. The digital display ticked upward, each number a step closer to the next interrogation. She watched as the men near the exit exchanged a glance, their posture quietly alert. Martha wondered if they recognized the insignia, if they understood what it meant to carry someone's memory in a place like this. The jacket was more than a piece of clothing. It was her armor, her proof, her way of saying that James's life and sacrifice mattered. Even if the world around her seemed determined to look away. Her number flashed on the screen. Martha stood, gathering her folder and pulling the jacket tighter around her. The jacket's fabric bunched awkwardly at her elbows, a reminder that it had been made for someone stronger, someone who wasn't coming back. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the ring beneath the layers, and stepped forward into the line, bracing herself for whatever came next. The clerk at counter 4 barely glanced up as Martha approached, her number blinking on the screen. The line behind her stretched past the rope dividers, restless with impatience. She placed her folder on the counter, careful not to let her hands tremble. The jacket's sleeve brushed the surface, its faded SEAL trident patch visible for anyone willing to look. "Proper ID," the clerk said, not meeting her eyes. Martha slid her military spouse ID and the folder containing her VA card, DD 214, marriage certificate, and all the other forms she'd carried in and out of this office for months. He flipped through the stack with a practiced indifference, pausing only to tap a few keys on his monitor. "These aren't valid under our policy," he said, pushing the documents back toward her in a single motion. She pressed her lips together, steadying herself. "I was told last week this was the most recent version. It's VA stamped." She offered the DS-180, the form she'd been sent back to retrieve twice before. He barely looked at it. "That's not the one we need. We require the updated paperwork. Office dress standard is also required for processing." Martha's grip tightened on the folder. The jacket's fabric bunched beneath her elbow as she tried to keep her composure. "My husband served 22 years. I've brought everything you've asked for, 3 times now." Her voice was low, but the words barely seemed to register. A security guard shifted by the information booth, his radio crackling. Another moved closer, watching the exchange. The clerk's attention had already drifted to the next number on his screen. "Step aside, ma'am. Next." She stayed rooted, trying again. "My benefits expire tomorrow. Please, just look." But the clerk waved her off. "Next," he repeated, louder this time. A man in work boots called out from further back. "Can we move this along?" Someone else sighed, and the tension in the room thickened. Martha felt every eye on her, the weight of their impatience pressing in. The security guard was beside her now, close enough that she could see the creases in his uniform shirt. Across the lobby, a man paused, his gaze catching on the trident patch at Martha's shoulder. He stiffened, recognition flickering in his eyes. For a moment, he watched as the scene played out. The clerk had already turned to the next customer, his hand sliding a clipboard across the counter. Another employee glanced over, then quickly looked away. Martha adjusted her sleeve, the trident nearly hidden now, and stepped aside just enough for the next person to squeeze past. The security guard hovered, ready to intervene if she lingered. She dug her phone from the jacket pocket with shaking fingers, the VA office number already memorized. The guard started to say something about not blocking the walkway, but Martha barely heard him. She pressed call and turned her back to the counter, trying to block out the noise and the stares. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the hum of the room. "Yes, I'm at the DMV on Cherry Street. They're saying the forms aren't current." The guard's radio squawked again. Martha pressed her other hand to her ear, struggling to hear the VA rep's answer, as the clerk continued on with the next customer, the stack of untouched forms on his desk, a silent rebuke. She shifted her weight, the jacket heavy around her shoulders, and stared down at the folder in her hands. The next number flashed on the screen, and the line shuffled forward. Martha clung to her documents, feeling the strain in her fingers as she tried to hold everything together, knowing she'd have to try again. Her hands moved mechanically, sliding the documents from the folder and arranging them on the counter as she'd been instructed before. The death certificate brushed against the VA paperwork. She pressed her palm flat, the jacket's cuff grazing the cold laminate. The room's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the tension gathering between her and the clerk. "My husband served 3 tours," she said, voice steady from repetition. She'd spoken these words to officials and strangers alike, always hoping this time someone would listen. This documentation was issued when he came home. The pause lingered, the word death caught in her throat, but she pushed forward, keeping her eyes fixed on the counter. The clerk didn't look up. "That's not our problem." His fingers tapped at the keyboard, a dull rhythm that made her feel invisible. Behind his shoulder, a wall of flyers for emissions testing and license renewals seemed to mock the gravity of her request. She drew in a breath, feeling the jacket tighten across her shoulders. "Could I speak to a supervisor?" she asked quietly, willing herself not to tremble. The request finally made him glance up. "If you're refusing to cooperate, you'll need to leave." His tone was flat, not angry, just tired, as if her presence was a problem to be solved. A security guard stepped forward, his badge reading, "Garcia." The squeak of his shoes broke the uneasy silence. "Ma'am, please step away from the counter." She gripped the sleeve of the jacket, the faded trident insignia wrinkling beneath her fingers. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the feeling away. Around her, the waiting room seemed to shrink, the sound of shuffling feet and murmured complaints closing in. She whispered. This was his service too, not to the staff, but to the photo tucked in her folder, a wedding picture, its edges worn from years of being handled. As she moved, the photo slipped from the folder and landed on the counter, the image of her husband in uniform briefly exposed before she covered it again. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over the VA hotline. The security guard shifted closer, eyes locked on her hand as though the phone itself was a threat. "We can't have disruptions," he said, his radio crackling. She tried to step back toward the row of chairs, but the guard blocked her path. Her folder slipped from her grasp, papers scattering across the floor. The death certificate slid beneath a chair. She knelt, gathering the sheets, the jacket nearly brushing the tile. The guard stayed close, watching her movements. As she stood, the phone pressed to her ear, the VA hold music echoing faintly. "I have a right to be here," she said, her voice barely more than a statement of fact. The jacket hung open, revealing a faded T-shirt with the outline of a unit insignia. A woman in a crisp navy blazer appeared at the edge of the counter, her badge reading "Supervisor." She didn't ask for the story. "Ma'am, our office dress standard is clear. We can't process your request unless you comply. If you continue to disrupt the office, we'll have to ask you to leave." Martha's grip tightened on her folder. She met the supervisor's eyes, searching for any sign of understanding, but found only policy. She gathered her things, the jacket heavy on her frame, and took a step back, not toward the exit, not toward the counter, but into the uncertain space between. As the supervisor turned away, the security guard hovered, ready to escort her out if she lingered. The room's attention flickered and faded, but not every gaze was indifferent. Near the exit, a few men sat quietly, their posture shifting as they watched the scene unfold. 3 men occupied seats near the DMV exit, each absorbed in his own quiet routine. One flipped through a car magazine, another scrolled on his phone, and the third sat with his hands resting on his knees, eyes moving slowly across the room. Jeans, plain T-shirts, work boots, nothing about them drew attention at first glance. The tallest had a faded ball cap pulled low, the shortest wore a watch with a frayed nylon band. They blended in, part of the background noise of the waiting area. When the security guard stepped in front of Martha, something subtle shifted. The magazine lowered a fraction. The man with the phone set it face down on his thigh, thumb poised. The third's back straightened, shoulders coming square. The moment was quiet, but the air seemed to tighten. A glint of gold thread caught the light as Martha adjusted her late husband's jacket. The trident insignia, nearly worn through, peeked from her shoulder. The man with the magazine noticed first. He leaned slightly toward the others and murmured, "I think that's a SEAL insignia." The words were soft, meant only for the men beside him, but they carried a weight of recognition. Without a word, their attention sharpened. The man in work boots flexed his fingers once, a silent signal. The one with the phone glanced at the patch, then at Martha, then at the guard. Their eyes met for a moment, an unspoken agreement passing between them. The posture of all 3 changed, not dramatic, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Shoulders squared, chins lifted, their presence suddenly more defined. The tallest rose first, stretching as if to work out a cramp. His sleeve slid up his forearm, revealing the edges of an eagle clutching an anchor inked into his skin. The lines were blurred by time, but the meaning was clear. The others followed his lead, standing with a casualness that belied their alertness. The man with the phone held it low, camera already recording, his movements deliberate. They moved in with a quiet coordination, closing the space around Martha without crowding her. One positioned himself just to her left, placing his body subtly between her and the guard. Another flanked her right side, hands loose at his sides. The third stayed a step behind, near the seats, his phone capturing the scene. No one spoke, but their stance formed a protective buffer. Nearby, people sensed the change before they understood it. Conversations paused, a few heads turned. The DMV's usual clatter faded into a hush as the 3 men took their places, calm but unmistakably present. Their faces were unreadable, but their intent was clear in the way they stood alert, steady, quietly authoritative. Martha, still focused on her folder, hadn't noticed them yet. The security guard hesitated, eyes flicking from the men to the patch on Martha's jacket and back again. The clerk behind the counter shuffled papers, pretending not to see. As the men settled into position, the tallest adjusted his cap, revealing close-cropped hair. He cleared his throat, just loud enough to be heard. The atmosphere in the room changed, the sense of isolation lifting. A silent message passed between the witnesses and Martha, promise of recognition and support, even if she didn't know it yet. The moment held, waiting for someone to speak. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward from the group, his presence drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "Ma'am?" His voice was calm, measured, carrying a note of respect that seemed out of place in the sterile DMV. Martha turned, the word catching her off guard, its weight unmistakable. She'd heard it before at ceremonies, but here it felt like a lifeline. The clerk's hands hovered over the keyboard, pausing as the man positioned himself beside Martha. He didn't move aggressively, just stood with an easy readiness, his stance quietly assured. The security guard's posture shifted as well, his grip on the radio loosening, uncertainty flickering across his face. The man nodded toward Martha's folder. "Would you mind if I looked at your paperwork?" His tone invited no argument, but it wasn't harsh. She passed the documents over, her hands unsteady but grateful for the intervention. He flipped through the forms with practiced efficiency, pausing at the VA paperwork. His thumb smoothed over the embossed seal, a small gesture that spoke of familiarity. Across the lobby, the other two men repositioned themselves. One leaned casually against a pillar, arms crossed, while the third lingered by the exit, phone angled discreetly toward the scene. Their movements were unhurried, but the effect was unmistakable. They formed a subtle perimeter around Martha, their presence shifting the balance in the room. The usual noise of the DMV, the shuffle of feet, the mechanical beeping of ticket numbers dulled to a low hum. Even the clerks behind the counter seemed to sense the change, their attention fixed on the unfolding scene. The tall man removed his cap, exposing a close-cropped haircut that marked him as military, even out of uniform. He examined one of the forms, then spoke clearly, not to anyone in particular but for all to hear. "This paperwork is current. For surviving spouses, these forms remain valid." His words hung in the air, quiet but absolute. The security guard took a small step back, his hand dropping away from his belt. The clerk's eyes darted from the man to Martha, then down to the stack of documents, uncertainty replacing his earlier indifference. Behind the counter, another employee watched with wide eyes, her hands still over the keyboard. Martha drew a shaky breath, the jacket heavy on her shoulders. The man didn't offer comfort, just angled his body so she was shielded from the rest of the waiting room. His focus remained on the paperwork, his thumb tapping the marriage certificate, as if recognizing the significance of every page. The man by the pillar approached, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped just close enough to see the documents, his sleeve rising to reveal a faded eagle and anchor tattoo. No words passed between the two men, but their coordinated movement spoke volumes. The room, once indifferent, now watched in careful silence. A phone rang somewhere in the background, the sound jarring in the hush. The second man took the death certificate, holding it up for the clerk to see. The clerk's hand hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to proceed. The tall man returned the documents to Martha, his voice steady. "Everything here's in order." He didn't look for approval or raise his voice, simply stated it as fact. The security guard shifted his stance, eyes moving between the men and the supervisor's office at the back. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward, sensing a change in the air. Behind the counter, someone reached for a water cup without looking away. Martha clutched the papers to her chest, the edges pressing into her husband's jacket. Her shoulders straightened, the insignia on her sleeve suddenly visible to all. The tall man replaced his cap, his gesture crisp and practiced, commanding attention without effort. At the information desk, the supervisor stood abruptly, smoothing her blazer as she made her way toward the counter. The tall man stepped aside, making space for her approach. Martha's grip on her folder tightened, her focus sharpening as the supervisor reached for her paperwork. The room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The protocol for verifying military documents is straightforward, but in practice, it often depends on who stands behind the counter and who stands in front. The SEAL, nearest the counter, reached into his back pocket and produced his military identification, the card's edges dulled from years of use. He placed it on the counter beside Martha's folder, letting the familiar insignia speak for itself. The clerk hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face as he picked up the credential and glanced at the name. "This is current," the SEAL said, voice low but direct. "She's entitled to lifetime benefits as his surviving spouse. He didn't raise his voice or explain further. Simply tapped the top page of Martha's paperwork where her husband's service dates and the embossed seal were clearly visible. His tone made it clear he knew the regulations, and that he expected them to be followed. The supervisor arrived, her blazer crisp, her steps measured. She took in the scene. The seal's ID still in the clerk's hand, Martha gripping the edge of her husband's jacket, the two other men positioned nearby. Her eyes lingered on the trident patch at Martha's shoulder, then shifted to the supervisor badge pinned to her own chest. She addressed the clerk, her voice even. "Let's review her file." The clerk's attitude changed. His hands moved more quickly, pulling up Martha's information in the DMV system, the earlier dismissiveness gone. The supervisor leaned in, reviewing each document with practiced care. She checked the marriage certificate, the DD-214, and the VA forms, her finger tracing the official stamps and signatures. The process was quiet, methodical, and markedly different from the brusque treatment Martha had received before. One of the seals stepped away from the counter and returned with a chair. He set it beside Martha and offered a small nod, wordless but reassuring. She sat, the jacket's fabric bunching at her elbows, her hands now steadying the folder in her lap. The third seal crossed the lobby to the water fountain, filled a paper cup, and brought it to her. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, the water leaving faint marks on the jacket as she drank. The supervisor continued her review, initialing each page as she finished. When she was done, she handed the approved paperwork back to Martha, using both hands a small gesture of respect. The clerk returned the seal's ID, his eyes lingering on the photograph before sliding it across the counter. The seal tucked it away without a word. Around them, the DMV had grown noticeably quieter. Customers watched, the usual impatience replaced by a kind of attentive silence. The staff at the counters kept their eyes on their screens, but their posture had shifted, more careful now, more aware. Martha folded her documents carefully, her movements measured, the folder finally feeling light in her hands. She stood, the chair scraping softly against the tile, and adjusted the jacket on her shoulders. The seal stepped back, making space for her to move away from the counter without crowding her. As Martha gathered her things, the supervisor offered a final nod, her expression less rigid than before. The process had been followed, the paperwork verified, and the respect due had finally been shown. The seals remained nearby, their presence steady and unhurried, as if their role wasn't over just because the forms had been stamped. Outside, the sounds of traffic drifted in, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Martha clutched her folder, the jacket's insignia visible as she prepared to leave the counter. The men who had stood with her didn't step away. They waited, silent and watchful, as the next stage of her day began. The meaning of brotherhood stretches far beyond the battlefield, and in that DMV lobby, it took on a quieter form. The seals remained close, their presence a silent shield as Martha gathered her documents and stood. The tallest, his stance broad and steady, shifted just enough to block the last curious glances from the staff. The one with the tattooed forearm kept his eyes on the exits, his posture relaxed but attentive. They didn't fill the silence with reassurances or platitudes. Instead, they offered the kind of company that asks for nothing and promises everything. As Martha tucked her approved paperwork into the jacket's inner pocket, the familiar weight of her husband's challenge coin pressed against her. The seal nearest her cleared his throat, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "James Wilson, right?" She nodded, her hand brushing the faded patch on her shoulder. The men exchanged a look quick, practiced, each recognizing the name and the history it carried. There were no questions about missions or medals, just a brief tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in their posture. They understood what wasn't being said. She mentioned his last deployment, the year he left, the base where they'd lived. The seals listened, careful not to ask anything that would cross a line. Their quiet focus was its own kind of comfort, a reminder that respect can be shown in silence. The shortest of the three pulled a notepad from his back pocket, scribbled a number, and handed it to her. "Martinez at the VA. He'll help if you need anything." The handwriting was blocky, the gesture practical. Martha folded the slip, sliding it beside her paperwork. The DMV staff kept their distance now. The clerk who'd turned her away earlier avoided her eyes, voice brittle as he helped the next customer. The supervisor lingered by the door, arms folded, watching the seals with a new kind of wariness. The security guard hovered near the entrance but made no move to intervene. When Martha stood, the seals fell into step around her. They didn't crowd her, just formed a loose perimeter as she moved toward the exit. The tallest held the door, his tattoo visible as his sleeve shifted. Outside, the afternoon was bright and ordinary cars idling, distant laughter from a group of teenagers, the hum of traffic on the main road. They walked with her to her weathered pickup, its paint dulled by sun and time. One of the seals opened the door, the hinges creaking in the quiet. Martha paused, her hand resting on the frame, the jacket's insignia catching the light. The seal with the motorcycle helmet offered a small two-finger salute, a gesture understated but unmistakable. Martha found herself returning it, her hand trembling just a little. She slid into the driver's seat, paperwork pressed close to her chest. The seals waited until she started the engine, their silhouettes steady in her rearview mirror. She gave a small wave and they nodded in return, no words, no fanfare, just the quiet assurance that she was not alone in this. As Martha pulled out of the parking lot, the sunlight caught the edges of the old seal patch on her shoulder. The men lingered for a moment, then turned back toward their own vehicles. The world around them resumed its usual rhythm, but something in the air had shifted a silent acknowledgement, a promise kept. The automatic doors slid shut behind her, their sound muffled by the distance. As Martha stepped into the sunlight, the approved paperwork still clutched tight against the front of her husband's jacket. She paused in the lot, jacket heavy on her shoulders, as the seals lingered a few steps away. The one with the motorcycle helmet approached, his movements steady, not rushed. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, square patch dark blue, edged in gold, with a gold star stitched into the center. There was no ceremony, just a quiet respect in the way he handled it. He peeled the backing, then pressed the patch onto the jacket's shoulder, right beside the old, faded trident. The placement was careful, deliberate. His thumb ran along the edge, smoothing it down so it sat flush against the worn fabric. The gold star caught the late afternoon sun, standing out against the olive green. "It's an honor to add this gold star family of a fallen seal," he said, voice steady. His words carried a weight that needed no explanation. The other seals watched, silent, their stance relaxed but attentive. This was a ritual they all understood, way of marking someone as one of their own, even when the uniform was gone. Martha's hand rose, almost involuntarily, to trace the new patch. The embroidery felt stiff, the threads raised and unfamiliar. The old insignia beside it was soft from years of wear. The colors faded, but the new gold star shone bright, its meaning unmistakable. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The moment was complete, in itself a recognition, a welcome, a promise that her loss was seen and remembered. The seal with the helmet stepped back, giving her space. He nodded once, a gesture that said more than words could. The others offered small acknowledgments, a hand lifted in a quiet salute, a brief meeting of eyes. They didn't linger, didn't press her with questions or condolences. The act of adding the patch was enough, a signal that she belonged, that her husband's sacrifice was honored, and that she would not be forgotten by his community. Martha stood for a while, her fingers resting on the gold star. The jacket no longer felt like just a relic of grief. It had been transformed a symbol not only of what she had lost, but also of what she still carried. The patch was a visible sign to anyone who knew what it meant. She was the family of a fallen seal, and that bond would not be broken. She walked to her pickup, the jacket fitting differently now, the weight on her shoulders balanced by the new sense of connection. The sun caught the patch as she opened the door, and for a moment she let her hand linger on the embroidery. The threads were already warming to her skin. She slid behind the wheel, the paperwork safe in her pocket, and started the engine. The gold star glinted in the side mirror as she pulled away, a quiet reminder that her story and her husband's would not be lost in the shuffle of ordinary days. Inside the building, staff began to gather for the next morning's routine. The doors would open soon, but something in the air had shifted. The patch on Martha's jacket was just one sign of what had changed. Change at the DMV began quietly, marked by small but deliberate steps. The morning after the incident, staff gathered in the break room before opening. The supervisor laid out the widow's paperwork on the table, each document flagged where policy had failed her. She tapped the VA stamp on the form, her voice even. "This is valid. For surviving spouses, it doesn't expire. You need to recognize it." The message was clear. Mistakes like yesterday's wouldn't be repeated. The clerk from Counter 4 listened in silence. When the meeting ended, the supervisor handed him a slip temporary reassignment to training. His new schedule included mandatory sessions on veteran documentation and sensitivity, a response to what had happened in the lobby. He didn't protest. He took the slip and left for the training department, his role in the front office on hold until he completed every course. By midday, maintenance workers installed new placards above the service counters. Each one listed accepted military and veteran documents, contact numbers for local VA offices, and a dedicated hotline for military families. The signs were simple, the lettering bold enough for anyone to read. They served as a visible reminder of the changes underway, a sign that military families would be recognized and supported. The supervisor also added regular veteran sensitivity training to the monthly schedule. Staff were expected to attend sessions covering respectful interactions, proper handling of documentation, and the unique challenges faced by veterans and their families. The training included role-playing and scenario discussions, encouraging each employee to consider the impact of their actions. Attendance was tracked, and participation became a standard part of the job. Word of the incident moved beyond the DMV's walls. Customers who'd been there described the scene to friends and neighbors. The story of a widow and her husband's jacket, of SEALs stepping in, spread through the community. It reached local organizations and eventually the newsroom. The local paper ran an article on the changes at the DMV, highlighting the new policies and the commitment to better serve veterans and their families. The piece noted the supervisor's efforts and the visible improvements in the office. Support for military families grew in unexpected ways. The widow started receiving calls from other spouses, some local, some from out of state, sharing their own stories of bureaucratic obstacles and offering encouragement. These conversations led to the formation of a support group, using the DMV's community room for monthly meetings. The group began small, but attendance grew as word spread. The room filled with mementos, dog tags, photos, flight helmets, each one, a reminder of the experiences they shared. The original clerk, after completing his training, returned to a new role at the information desk. He kept referral forms close at hand and greeted military families with a different kind of attention. The supervisor attended a support group meeting, listening from the back of the room, and later approved a bulletin board for veteran resources outside the meeting space. Flyers for housing, job postings, and VA services soon covered the board, making it easier for families to find what they needed. The group eventually outgrew the small community room. The supervisor arranged access to a larger space upstairs, where the walls still bore notes from the latest training session. The widow, now a familiar presence, wiped the board clean before each meeting, preparing for the conversations and support that would follow. In time, the DMV became more than just a place for paperwork. It became a point of connection, a place where veterans and their families knew they would be seen and heard. The changes rippled outward, touching lives in ways the staff hadn't expected, and for those who gathered each month, the support they found there became as important as any policy or placard. Each Thursday, she takes her seat at the folding table in the VA community room, a stack of benefit forms and a worn notebook at her side. The younger widow across from her hesitates over Form 21-2680, pencil poised above the boxes that need notarization. The older woman's instructions are clear and steady, her finger moving down the page, pausing at the lines that trip up most newcomers. The lights overhead hum as they work, but the rhythm is familiar. This is where many come first, unsure how to begin, looking for someone who understands the language of loss and paperwork. She has become a fixture in this space. The VA receptionists wave her through without checking ID, a small jar of peppermint set aside just for her. Her name is spoken easily now by staff, by volunteers, by those who've come to rely on her for updates before the official memos arrive. The framed photo of her husband sits on the table, the glass marked by fingerprints from being passed around. He looks out over the group, his dress blues crisp, a presence that lingers even as the room fills with the quiet shuffle of chairs and the murmur of conversation. At the DMV, where she once stood uncertain and alone, the staff greet her differently. The woman who used to work counter 4 now stops by the information booth to chat, sometimes stepping out to explain new procedures to the group. The security guard by the entrance nods as she hauls in folders for the day's meeting. They know her coffee order, the chair she prefers. These small gestures signal a shift. She's no longer just another face in the line. During meetings, her husband's jacket hangs on the back of her chair. The new seal patch, stitched just below the original, catches the afternoon light. The fabric has softened over time, but the gold star stands out bright, unmistakable, a mark of the family she now represents. When a breeze from the door stirs the jacket, the patches ripple, drawing the eyes of newcomers who haven't yet learned their meaning. After sessions, the younger widows linger, waiting for a quiet moment to approach. They ask about survivor benefits, how to explain absence to children, what to do when the system says no. She answers with what she's learned, which forms need originals, how to track a claim's progress, who to call when the process stalls. She writes down steps on index cards, her handwriting careful and neat, the information precise. Her notebook is filled with handwritten regulations, each section flagged for quick reference. She keeps track of changes to benefit rules, notes from training sessions, and practical advice passed along by others who've walked this path. When someone is denied housing or a payment is delayed, she listens, fingers brushing the sleeve of her jacket. The gesture grounds her, the new patch beneath her touch, a reminder that she carries more than her own story now. The younger women watch her closely. They see how she steadies herself, how she turns frustration into guidance. In her, they recognize a living link to the sacrifices they share, a mentor whose experience lights the way through unfamiliar territory. They'll develop their own habits in time, but for now, they follow her example, learning how to turn hardship into help. Sometimes, a new member will comment on the shine of the gold star, its contrast with the faded trident above it. She doesn't explain, but when someone is especially lost, she'll let her hand rest on the patch, a quiet reminder that service continues in many forms. The jacket, once a symbol of solitude, now marks her as part of something larger, a network built on memory, resilience, and shared purpose. The air in the room is always dry from the AC, but she keeps water and cups nearby, a small kindness learned from years spent waiting in government offices. These details, passed from one widow to the next, become part of their routine, a way of caring for each other that's as steady as any regulation. In the corner, the jacket hangs quietly, patches catching the light. Each thread, each emblem, holds a story that extends beyond the forms and meetings, an ongoing legacy that endures, visible to anyone who knows what to look for. Everyday service is often quiet, a gold star patch on a faded jacket, a steady hand guiding someone through the maze of forms, a moment of recognition in a crowded room. Military families continue the work of service long after deployment ends, carrying the legacy in small, persistent ways. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to honor these unsung heroes. Share your own experiences or stories of military families in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that give voice to their perseverance. True service isn't just found on the battlefield, it lives on in the daily acts of solidarity and support, carried forward by those left behind.